Hello, everybody. We're back. We're at the wheel. I'm Joe White of the High Speed Radio Substack. My partner in crime, Tu Lee, Sino Auto Insights. It's been it's summer, okay? So we've been a little irregular, but we are back on the road and we're going to have a lot to talk about. We won't cover everything that we could, but we're going to talk today about the day of reckoning. It's happening at Volkswagen and what's behind that big restructuring that they're talking about as we speak in Germany. We're going to talk a little bit about the future of the USMCA, which is now officially up in the air. Talk about Polestar, the Geely-owned brand, electric vehicle brand that is basically getting run out of the U.S. market and what that means. And then if we get time, we'll talk a little bit about Rivian and maybe Lucid too. But Rivian has had a good month for a change in terms of its delivery forecast. So
goodish,
goodish, better than
I
badish.
wouldn't call it full-fledged good. Yeah, I wouldn't call it full-fledged good.
Yeah, no, that unfortunately not full-fledged good. So let's start with talking about Volkswagen. And I'll set this up, but I want you to kind of take the ball on this because a lot of what's happening at Volkswagen is actually about China. And you know a lot about that. So for our readers listen to me, our listeners, and hopefully our readers, but our listeners.
We're new media, Joe. We're new media.
Yeah, our listeners and viewers who may be justifiably taking some time off around the U.S. holidays and the World Cup may not be aware, but Volkswagen's supervisory board, essentially their board of directors and top management, are meeting as we record this on Thursday, the 9th of July, to take action or avoid taking action on what is understood to be a really profound restructuring. I mean, up to 100,000 jobs eliminated over time. 4 factories in Germany or in Europe potentially being shut down again over time. And it's a real moment for a company that that not too long ago was basically tied for number one seller in the world. Seemed to have was the number one brand in China 5 or 6 years ago. Well, all that has changed. Oh, and of course owned Porsche, which is probably one of the finest luxury auto franchises or consumer franchises of any kind in the whole world. What happened to Volkswagen? Because I think a lot of it, happened. What's bad at Volkswagen has been happening in and because of China. What's your take?
Well, let's peel the layers of the onion back a little bit and give some history lessons. Volkswagen was the first brand or one of the first brands in China. And so there's a long history of growth in China for the last, with the exception of the last 6 or 7 years. Let's say it's all been all gas for Volkswagen Group. Okay. And when we say Volkswagen Group, we mean the 800-pound gorilla Volkswagen brand, but then also Audi and Porsche. Okay. Let's always remember that Volkswagen Group has at least a dozen brands, I want to say. And Skoda also sells in China. So there's a number of brands that were helping Volkswagen become the first or second largest automaker in the world over the last 40 years. A big part of the reason that Volkswagen and Toyota and GM for that matter became these behemoths that sold in the multiple millions is largely due to China. And I don't know if people outside of Asia really recognize or acknowledge that fact. So in order to have the king fall from his perch, he needs to get to that perch. And I think Volkswagen and Toyota largely did that up until around 2018, 2019, when COVID happened.
Yeah, no, and that's a real break point. COVID was a real break point. I'm just looking, and I'm going to throw it back to you in just a second, but I want to point this out to people listening. In 2019, as I understood it, reading on this, Volkswagen peaked in China at like 4.2 million plus or minus vehicles in China alone, and now they are under 3 million vehicles in China and headed down. They're on the down elevator. They've lost 4 factories worth of production. Again, depending on how you want to count it, but that's roughly right. 4 factories worth of production in just 5.5 or 6 years, which is a blink of an eye. exactly. Go ahead. So what caused that? Where did they fall off the rails in China? Because they definitely did fall off the rails. How?
So Volkswagen, let's say that's a microcosm of the legacy automakers. Up until 2017, 2018, 2019, the collective legacy automaker market share in China was over 50%. Let's say
Mhm,
closer to 60%. Now it's closer to 27, less than 30%, which means on a base of, let's say, 25 million cars. Now, more than half of those, and I'm just talking private passenger vehicles, half of those are new energy vehicles. And so when you hear about the Neos, the Xpungs, the Li Autos, what you should really be focusing on is the Geelys and the BYDs because they drive the volume. Okay.
mhm,
Neo, Xpeng, Li Auto, they're happy if they're going to sell 500,000, 600,000 units this year. So on a base of 25 million units, not a ton, but
no,
growing and significant for them. But it's BYD at 4.6 million units in 2025. 90% of that shipped domestically in China. That's
mhm,
eaten up the Volkswagen brand volume, mass market volume, sales volume. And then you look at Cherry and Geely also really, really keying in the sub 25,000 US dollar vehicles. And we're starting to see that leak out into Europe, Latin America, Southeast Asia, South America, Middle East a little bit. And so the concern is not only how do we stop the bleeding in our most important market? Because you had mentioned 4.2 million units. That was total out of 10 million units or 10 and a half
yeah, that
million
was
units.
it's 40 to 50% of their global volume, depending on how you want to count it. But it's basically right. It's and perhaps I think in many years a larger share of their global profit.
And you you just took the words right out of my mouth. Now, the Volkswagen brand creates a ton of flexibility for Volkswagen Group because of the volume. They get economies of scale, they get cheaper piece prices. Not only that, but at a time where Europe and the United States was really, really upset at Volkswagen Group because of Dieselgate. They were
Right.
largely isolated or insulated from Dieselgate in China. And so there, despite these enormous challenges in Europe and the United States, they were still growing in China. Now, the two or three headed monster, depending on how you want to look at it, Volkswagen brand, Audi, and Porsche have all been crippled in the
Yeah.
China market.
Yeah.
And let's look at Volkswagen brand as a 10 million unit company. Porsche only contributes 300,000 units to that 10 million units, but it drives proportionally a ton of their profits.
Oh,
The Volkswagen
absolutely.
brand
Yeah.
provides,
Super
and
super
then
vital.
Audi as
Yeah.
well, right? High margin
Right.
vehicles. And they've all fallen off a cliff. Porsche might be lucky to sell 40,000 units this year in China.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they were talking about potentially, they always teased, hey, maybe we'll build in China. Like, like their shit didn't stink a little bit, right? Like, and now they can't give away those things. And, we had a episode while you were away, Joe, of talking about the Luce, the Ferrari Luce,
Ferrari. Hmm.
sold out in China, sold out in
Yeah.
China. So
Yeah.
as the controversy, so is Benedetto Vina crazy like a fox? Maybe. But anyways, that's a little bit off
Yeah.
topic. But that being said, it's an electric vehicle. It really, really leans into the technology and the design that Chinese consumers like. Okay.
Yeah,
So
that's right, and again, I mean, and you make this point, but it's to hit it. I mean, so Volkswagen is getting clobbered on the mass market side, as you said, by BYD, Geely, and those brands. But they're also getting clobbered in the luxury market. By the way, as is Mercedes, their sales just this past
and
announcements
BMW.
were yeah, and BMW,
I think we can kind of
all
lump the Germans in
yeah,
together.
but I mean, at one level, Volkswagen has some very specific Volkswagen problems, which we'll kind of talk about. But they are not. They are also part of a larger and really profound shift. I remember going to China, and you lived in China, and I never lived in China. I just would visit, every year for auto shows before the pandemic. And I remember you would walk around Beijing or even walk around Shanghai, but certainly in Beijing, you just walk around and there'd be like half a dozen black Audis lined up outside some restaurant, right? Where, so the party guys are in there having an expense account dinner. And that was just like the staff car for party and party functionaries, but also, people who were making it, right? Making it in China. They would have a black Audi. Not anymore, right? But they might have a Tesla and they might have a Xpeng or a Li Auto, but yeah, the black Audi, that's not happening anymore, at least not to the same degree. It's interesting to me that Volkswagen, and I wanted you to talk about this. So so it's not like Volkswagen couldn't have seen this coming, but it seems like it seems like they saw it coming, but they couldn't figure out how to hit the pitch. They couldn't figure out how to bring to market vehicles that were competitive. What went wrong?
I'm going to give you a quick example of how they use duct tape to create a solution for a missed opportunity to quickly put a vehicle into production into the market, and how the Chinese consumer has really matured, its tastes, its understanding of brand, and how Chinese brands have really become these desirable brands that Chinese consumers want. So back in the day, when I moved there, so I lived there, as you know, Joe, from 2008 or 2009 to 2022. And when I first got there, like you said, living in Beijing, where is basically Washington D.C. for China, right?
Hmm.
And so government officials all over the place. So that means a lot of black Audis,
Yeah,
A6s, A8s,
yeah,
and so kids growing up in 2008 are now the car buying public. What they saw was Audi is a government official's car. It's not a cool car. It's a government official's car.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
in how the culture and the use cases are different, because if you're a government official, if you're a CEO of a company, you're not driving the car, you're in the back
Right.
seat.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So to resolve that challenge, what they quickly did was they created A6Ls, A8Ls.
Hmm. I
And
remember
so the
that. Yeah,
L was really the long wheelbase was
everything was
popularized,
stretched. Yeah, yeah.
and all that, but that's all they did. They kept the
Yeah,
car
yeah,
the
it's like,
same and
if all we have
added.
to do is stretch this thing 4 to 6 inches or whatever, and we're good to go. Everything else can be the same, it's all fine. And then that game came to a stop.
And it worked for them, but as the Chinese consumer, their tastes, their kind of understanding evolved, and they moved up market and are able to kind of differentiate brands and what their likes are. As Tesla comes into the market and shows them what technology does in a vehicle, it really, really created this inflection point, while most Westerners couldn't access the China market because it was during COVID.
Yeah,
And so I think what they thought 10 or 12 years ago, we'll just patch it by, an example of, let's not figure out what the Chinese consumer actually wants. Let's just piece together something, and the logo on the hood will sell the vehicle. Okay,
y
that's not
yeah,
happening anymore.
no.
The sense of how fast things have changed. There have been 7 million units of ICEs taken out of the system over the last 7 million units,
Yeah.
Joe.
No, right, and again, I mean, you put that, I can't even do that math in my head, but that's like 25 or more factories worth of production. Again, I'm doing 250,000 per factory because that's math I can do in my head, maybe. I know it's more complex than that, but there's this huge overhang now of overcapacity in combustion vehicles in China, huge, right? And the foreign brands are sitting on a good deal of that, not all of it, but a good deal of it, and it just
And
sits there.
if we so let's kind of talk about how this affects Volkswagen Group
Yeah,
globally. Number one market right now is the United States. They're shrinking a little bit in Europe. They're falling off a cliff. 16% first half year over year decline in global sales in the first half of 2026. More than 20% decline in China. So both Volkswagen brand and Porsche still have not found a floor,
No,
from
doesn't seem
how
like
much
it.
sales are shrinking. So it could still get worse from a sales volume standpoint. And we know that Bluma 2 weeks ago had said they're taking 3 million units out of their system
Yeah,
effectively, or are in the process. And
yeah,
I think
over
they've
time.
taken some sales volume out of the system. And that really led to, oh, we're going to close some more factories in Germany.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. And so as the train is crashing, they decide to buy 5% stake in Xpeng because they know they either don't have the skill set in-house to be technologically competitive with the Teslas or the Xpengs and Neos in the China market. So instead of making and they did try, because you
Oh,
and I know
oh, absolutely.
Caryod's been in place for a
They
while.
had, yeah, they spent billions on trying Cariad, and honestly, for me, and this was pointed out to me by my Reuters colleagues in Europe when I was still working for Reuters. You know, they headquartered Cariad in some suburb of Wolfsburg, or not in Berlin, not even in Frankfurt or Munich. I know I'm forgetting the name of the German town, but it was not a German town that you'd think high skills software people who could work literally anywhere would want to work at. And yet that's where they put this thing, because that's kind of, that's because that was the Volkswagen way. And just that alone was this metaphor for kind of the failure of car out. And I personally did more than one story, about reboots number 1, 2, and 3 of car out. I just want to beat more on this, if you don't mind. Just in the last couple of days, my former colleagues at Reuters had a really good story pulling together how Western automakers, and their lead example was General Motors, but Volkswagen and other Western automakers are doing the same thing, are increasingly turning to Chinese engineers, either partners like at Xpeng in the Volkswagen case, or their own Chinese engineers, like in GM's case at SAIC, to do the software, the electrical architecture, basically the whole car. They're outsourcing the fundamental intellectual capital of the vehicle to China, to their Chinese partners or Chinese operations now. And I looked at that and I said, well, that's a big deal, because it's one thing to say, okay, we'll use China for cheap manufacturing, right? It's another thing to say, the fun the intellectual capital that goes into an automobile, we now have to get from China because we don't know how to do it. That's a big deal. And I think
And
Volkswagen is
and
very much in that space.
so there's two things going on that I think are important to note. It's that they don't have the skill set and they can't do it fast enough.
Right.
So those are fundamentally two things that
Other
lead
than that,
into
everything's great.
lead into culture and management. Because how do you get faster? Hopefully leadership feels an urgency, injects some of that into that. The constraints that Volkswagen have are kind of similar to GM and Ford, and that's why let's put GM and Ford on an island in North America, the United States, because Stellantis has a 20% stake in a Chinese company.
Hmm.
Okay. So although Stellantis gets 30% of their profits, around 30% of their profits from the US entities that they own or the US brands that they own, they have a bit more flexibility, I think. Whereas GM and Ford, and it's really, really important because I want to reemphasize that everyone uses China as an export hub, not just the Chinese. Tesla uses it, GM
Right.
uses it, Ford
Right.
uses it.
Right.
Ford is trying to get an exemption on its Lincoln Nautilus because it ships it from Shanghai or
Hmm.
Changzhou.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right.
Let's be clear that China is the manufacturer to the world for many brands, not just Chinese brands. But that begets. So there's a couple of things going on with the China market that I want to kind of explore outside, the effects, the secondary effects, the knock-on effects. The NEV market is slowing down. The overall passenger vehicle market is going to be flat. And so when we know a market is flat, elbows get sharper and incentives get increased because in order to hold on to share or in order to try to take share, more money gets put on the hood. And we also need to remember that the Chinese government last year said no more involution, no more price cuts. So that
Yeah,
is largely
involution.
taken off the
Their
table.
term for crazy Eddie price wars, where like our prices are insane.
The market blowing up effectively.
Yeah,
And so for a communist country, for them to say, hey, stop all this competition
right.
is the big
Stop giving the masses what they want. Cheap cars.
crazy.
Cut it out.
So as the China market settles and growth kind of flattens for the Chinese automakers, it increases the pressure to export. For Volkswagen, it's going to increase the pressure for them to find profit somewhere else. So, and when we talk about the Volkswagen in the United States, we know the Volkswagen brand hasn't been super successful historically here. So,
Not for decades. No.
what do you think? Because I believe they're gonna lean in on Porsche in the United States. I just don't know how much more volume the US can take of $100,000 sports cars, two-door sports cars. And then let's get your comments on how important the Scout brand is going to be for them in the
Yeah,
US.
yeah. No, you're right. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, the Volkswagen. I mean, again, I'm sure one of the reasons why Oliver Blume, the CEO of Volkswagen, is smashing the glass and hitting the big red button in Germany today is because as he looks at the world, where is the opportunity for growth? And the one major market where Volkswagen could be shielded from Chinese competition, at least for a while, is the United States, right? Everywhere else, he's under assault. In Europe, he's under assault. Latin America, he's under assault from Chinese rivals. Even in Canada, now he's under assault. In Mexico, he's under assault. We go on. The United States is the one sheltered market for Western legacy brands. I mean, yes,
For
Tesla's here.
now.
Tesla's yeah, for now, yeah, and the for now is definitely an important caveat. But the problem there, and you're right. One, I mean, the market for $100,000 sports cars and $70,000 SUVs, which is really what the Porsche business is these days, is 50, 60,
Yep.
$70,000 very well appointed, nicely engineered combustion SUVs. I guess they've got an electric in there somewhere, but fundamentally combustion SUVs. Again, that is a U.S. market, North American market product anymore. But here, let's not, but now we have to talk about Donald Trump. And Trump is putting, is instituting tariffs or threatening more tariffs on imported vehicles. The best case scenario for Volkswagen, importing vehicles or Porsche vehicles from Germany, or Porsche AG, the nominally separate company exporting vehicles from Germany, it is I think a 15% tariff. But that depends on how the president of the United States feels on any given day about and he's threatening to put additional tariffs on European goods based on their uses, their alleged use of forced labor, slave labor. I think, especially in the case of Europe, that's pretty clearly seen as a pretense or pretext to just put more tariffs on and raise more revenue and put pressure on these companies to localize. But in the near term, it seems like Volkswagen has this tariff costs which are substantial. Yes, they produce Atlas SUVs in Tennessee, and I think they're looking at producing other products in Tennessee. You mentioned Scout. Scout, I mean, is a great brand. I mean, it's got a lot of legacy, good legacy in the United States. You know, it's a shame International Harvester, the developer, the originator of Scout, couldn't live to see the day when the Scout design, which if anybody knows it, is the classic SUV, two boxes on
Boxy.
stacked on top of each other, or three boxes, whatever. Point being, they invented the SUV look that has now been adopted by Bronco, both in the historic Bronco and the current one, Rivian, so on. But Scout is 2 years away from production in their factory in South Carolina. So that's a long time. Two, they've had to pivot from fully electric to or largely electric to largely extended range electric, essentially combustion plus a big battery drivetrain. Three, by the time Scout gets to market, you're going to potentially have a market that is just crowded with SUVs that are more or less in the same ballpark. I mean, and Rivian is the number one example, and I think we've talked about this before. If you step back a couple of paces from the Volkswagen Group and you ask yourself, why is it that the Volkswagen Group is investing $5 billion plus in Rivian to help Rivian build a line of SUVs and pickup trucks that are, from 50 paces identical to the Scout line, which Volkswagen is also funding. They're
Hold
going
on,
to,
let's make this more clear, Joe, that you and I would compare and buy against one another effectively,
uh,
right?
yeah. I mean, look, I don't think we're unique. If you look at the Scout SUV and the Rivian SUVs in a picture or even side by side, you look at them and say, well, this is the same concept. It's an international harvester SUV time travels to the 21st century. What do you have? You have the Rivian and you have the Scout. So just that alone, and that's forgetting all other competitors that could come in, electric Hyundais, extended range, still, Dodge or Ram product, on and on and on. So I'll bring this to a close. I do think that Volkswagen's problem is that the United States market is critical, but they're going to have to overcome tariffs, and they're not going to be able to just, they don't have a wide open field to run. They have a field that is clogged with competition, and
Let me ask you
it's going
this,
to be a rough
Joe.
ride all the way.
Do you feel in your bones that Trump will take away that 15% tariff? Because
No.
that would increase the likely, if he does not, that would increase the likelihood that Audis and Porsches may get built in the United States.
Yes. So
Would you guess
no.
that?
Well, I mean, first of all, let's stipulate the obvious, which is anyone predicting what President Trump will do on any given day at any given hour, should have their head examined, because that's the whole point of his leadership style, is to be unpredictable. Let's not, So anyway, that's a
Well,
pretty
he's
obvious.
predictable in his
Is
unpredictability. How's
predictable,
that?
and we're going to come back when we talk about the USMCA. We can elaborate on that. So that's number one. But I do think that he has consistently been strongly in favor of, and appears to believe strongly, that tariffs are good policy. We could have another podcast about debating that one, but he clearly believes tariffs are good policy. He's stuck with it.
Or a
You
good
know,
prod to
right? Or a good policy in good industry, good fiscal policy raises money. Good industrial policy, it forces companies to build within the United States. Okay, so yes, I do believe, and I think a lot of other people believe, that long term, Volkswagen, if they want to be relevant in this market, and get their market share out of the low single digits, they're going to have to build more of their product, and more of the Audi, more Porsche product vehicles in this country. I know there's a lot of people, and I think I'm one of them, who look at that plant that they're building for Scout in South Carolina and conclude that unless Scout, if Scout, blows the doors off and sells 150, 200,000 a year, fine. Then they should build another plant for the Porsches and the Audis. But if that doesn't happen, and it's more like 40 or 50,000 a year for Scout, well, then there's a plant that, and a supply chain, a surrounding supply chain that could probably be or redirected toward building Audi, you know, maybe even Porsche product, to overcome the tariffs and give them some running room. So it's going to play out over time, but I think those are definitely possibilities. And if I'm not mistaken, well, I mean, I'm not going to say that because I'm not sure I'm right, but I know Scott Keogh, who runs Scout, has been asked this multiple times by multiple people, and he's always been pretty cagey, because I think the honest answer for him, which I think is more or less what he says, is, never say never. You know, they'll do what they have to do to make
yeah,
it a
and
viable
and
business.
the world of automotive will change in the next 3 years for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's right. Maybe this is the moment we can shift gears a little bit to talk about, just for a few minutes,
Well, you and
about.
I thought the Volkswagen discussion was gonna be 5, 10 minutes. We're 30
No,
minutes
it's
in, Joe,
no,
so
and we're not, and we could talk more, but actually, the trade question you raised, brings us to, I think, another important development over the last, sort of the holiday week or whatever, the break,
starting on July
which is,
1st, correct?
yeah, yeah, which is the official declaration by the Trump administration that the United States will not extend the USMCA, as is,
As is.
and that now we're going to sort of a year by year. renegotiation, situation, and talks between the U.S. and Mexico are underway. When I last checked, and maybe someone will correct us, but when I last checked, the formal negotiations between the U.S. and Canada have not even started. I mean, they've been having discussions, but the formal, to the extent that that matters, the formal talks with Canada have not even started. I'll let you go first. I have a lot of thoughts about this, but I mean, USMCA being up in the air seems like a really big challenge for all automakers, not just the automakers that aren't GM, Ford, and Stellantis. It seems like the whole industry is going to be up in the air if the USMCA, is in the state of uncertainty like this.
You know what would be a really, really good, maybe separate episode is having some trade folks on here because
Absolutely.
the debate of whether the USMCA was net good to Canada, United States, or Mexico would be a great discussion. It's not for here and now. What we do know is that the Trump administration does want to reshore. So I think
Yeah.
that's a good thing. But the biggest wild card to me, Joe, is if and when Carney is able to finalize foreign direct investment from a Geely, a
Hmm.
BYD, or a Cherry, because that would really, really prod or incentivize Trump to change the terms of or rules of engagement. One of the hostages being held right now is the Gordie Howe Bridge.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
And the threats about if Chinese vehicles enter Canada, they're not going to be welcome across our
Yeah.
borders.
Yeah.
And so those are looming over the USMCA. Do I believe Carney is still going to try to move forward to secure some foreign direct investment? Of course he is,
Hmm.
because, and this is really important for guys like us who live in Michigan because Ontario is right across or, just north of us where predominantly most of the automotive happens in Canada. And so I'm curious and anxious to see if a deal is inked, what the terms of that deal is, because I don't see the quota numbers changing. And talk about incentivizing. That's why Carney put that 49,000 unit max or cap,
Yeah.
because it's like a taste of something that we know the Chinese want, but it's not enough for them to get full because it's not a meal. With the China market leveling off, the pressure to find growth somewhere else, even if we need to build it locally, is going to be increasingly um uh it's going to increase over the next several months.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that, and I mean, I do think that, and Mark Wakefield and I, his partners, has been talking about this a lot over the last couple of weeks. In related to the USMCA, and he talks about Fortress North America. So that
Mhm,
he's from the point of view of the Western automakers, and the Detroit Three especially. I call them the Motor City Three. The Motor City Three, that having a unified North American market with a North American scale supply chain and North American scale vehicle programs. I mean, if you do it right, but you have that opportunity, that is pretty much, that's going to be essential if North American and legacy, Western name brands and automakers are going to compete against the Chinese who start the game on the 30 or 40-yard line, maybe the 50, because they have this giant market at their back, and the government that runs that giant market, and their market is getting even bigger as they expand. You made the point about foreign direct investment in Canada. Let's not forget the direct investments also happening in Mexico, and maybe a step or two or three ahead of where it is in Canada. I completely agree that the logic of this is inescapable. I mean, the Chinese automakers are going to want to build in Mexico because Mexico is a great export platform to other parts of the world, certainly Latin America. I think Canada, I think they're going to want to get into Canada because that is certainly a way to say, hey, we're at the doorstep of the US market. And I think if you're the Trump administration, or from the Trump administration perspective, looking out on this, and frankly, this is the fear of Chinese vehicles entering the United States is a bipartisan fear. I mean, this very week, members of Congress are debating bills that would effectively shut out Chinese vehicles or vehicles with Chinese connectivity technology, shut them out of the U.S. market. But if you're looking at how do we have a USMCA where the M part, the Mexico, and the CA part, Canada, or the C part, Canada, have locally made Chinese brand vehicles? How do you shut them out? How do you have a three-way agreement and shut them out? I don't know. You know, and that's before you get to the problems that are hanging up the USMCA now, which is, the Trump administration wants much higher US content quotas. They want much tighter restrictions on rolling up Asian Chinese content into a part or a component or a black box that's nominally made in Mexico or nominally made in Canada, but it's 80% Asian or Chinese value. There's all this complicated stuff. I just, it doesn't look like the USMCA is going to be easy to fix along the lines that the Trump administration has demanded, which means if you're the automakers, you don't know what the rules of engagement are going to be in this market, in the North American market. You don't know what they're going to be. And I think that's not a good scenario,
But,
especially for the Detroit 3, but for others operating here as well, Toyota for that matter.
but, but what I really want to emphasize, Joe, is that we have to separate a couple of things here. The Chinese manufacturing locally in North America, whether it's Canada, Mexico, or the United States, and the technology that comes along with it,
Mhm,
and the data and where it resides, where it gets pinged, where it gets shipped. These are two separate conversations because
mhm.
ultimately, if we are to get foreign direct investment from a BYD or a Geely, that's a net positive for the United States. Where it lands, it could be a net negative for Michigan. And I've said this before, the US could be a winner while Michigan loses.
Well, so let me
And
ask you
so
yeah.
go
Let me
ahead.
ask you this though, and this brings us to the Polestar bit that I mentioned at the top. So Polestar appears to be like one of the first casualties of this kind of anti-China, bipartisan anti-China. It's not a shift; it's an anti-China escalation, if you will, by the U.S. government. These are Biden administration policies, forbidding Chinese connectivity, vehicles with Chinese connectivity software and technology from being sold here, that the Trump administration is enforcing. But so Polestar is basically saying, look, we gotta quit the market, because we can't make these, we can't comply. Volvo, which is also owned by Geely, the Chinese company, essentially a brother or sister brand, to Polestar. They're staying in the market, and I think they've gotten an exemption to continue building vehicles in South Carolina near Charleston. How hard or easy do you think it would be for Chinese companies to say, look, we're going to build vehicles in the United States and we're going to use US compliant connectivity and US compliant, you know, cameras and software. And we're going to store all the data in whatever red state you'd like us to store it in. Why can't they do that?
I think there's a delicate dance going on. I don't think the Chinese want to give up that farm so easily. I think they want to use it as a negotiating tool. I want to say I know. Let's just say that the moles that I have believe that the Chinese will do whatever it takes to get a foothold into the United States and into North America and ultimately the United States. There are practical concerns with the Chinese moving to a North America specific hardware software stack
Mhm.
because it's not native to their current platforms, their current
Right.
software that is not connected. And so it could be buggy. But one thing that I do know about the Chinese automakers is that where there's a will, there's a way. And they're just going to go through and get it done.
Yeah. Yeah, that
I
makes
was in
sense.
these calls I was in these calls and people were surprised about how almost flippantly I talked about they're gonna homologate, like, no problem, like, because that's their mindset, okay? Aren't technical or aren't the technical challenges aren't gonna stop them. It's the
But
political, it's the when is the right time to do this,
yeah.
and if we look at the Volvo Polestar situation, I was told that there's uh, a more compliance, a stack that's more compliant with the US and a stack that's not very compliant with the US. And Volvo has the flexibility to do that while
Right.
Polestar does not.
Mhm.
And if we're to peel the layers of the onion back a little bit, Polestar sold 6,000 cars in the
Yeah,
United
that's
States last
right.
year.
That's a really important point here. I mean, I think it's not like Polestar was a mass market or a mass volume success story here. They were struggling anyway. And I do wonder whether, as you say, I mean, so Geely Volvo demonstrated that they can comply or they can, or, or they have, as you said, just like you said, but is it worth it to make Polestar comply? And it sounds like the answer to that question from the Geely point of perspective was no, it's not worth it. Let's just
What would
bag it.
and here's the crazy thing, Joe. What would make a ton of sense is if the United States could get some of our allies to be consistent with a data sovereignty policy.
Mhm.
That would kind of force the Chinese, because it seems like they're only doing this for the US market.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is where having allies and having decent whoever our allies are. I'm not trying to pick who the United States, that's up for a separate debate. But if we had more markets, larger markets, passenger vehicle
Mhm.
markets that could also be consistent with our policies, then it would likely force the Chinese to do it sooner rather than later.
No, that
Okay.
and that's a really interesting point. You're right. I mean, in a different world, you could have a US, Europe, South Korea, Japan, US, Europe, South Korea, Japan, Latin America. Well, where it seems to be headed, and again, I don't think this is great for the automakers, is at least a bipolar or a bifurcated world where you have, technology for China and then technology for everywhere else. It might even get more complicated than that, but that seems to be and that's not great. I mean, you'd rather have scale and uniformity, but it also doesn't seem, as you said, it doesn't seem like it's impossible. I mean, it
But
doesn't
we
seem,
so here's the crazy thing. GM and Ford and Volkswagen are already doing it in China.
yeah, right,
So
and
they're using Chinese technology. GM has, you're going to see on the balance sheet, the financial statement at the end of the year, a bump in their profits because Momenta just went IPO.
yeah, right,
You know,
and
a
they're using, yeah,
Chinese
which is
autonomous
Chinese,
vehicle company.
yeah, 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 yeah.
So it's not as controversial as people would make it out to be. Now, the Chinese don't want to do it for sure, but they also want to enter a 15 million unit market because
Yeah,
number one, they have a ton of confidence in their product. Number two, this is likely going to be their most profitable market.
yeah, I was gonna say the profit pool in the United States is the prize, and, I doubt that a Chinese automaker is gonna make a big dent in sales of, F-150s, or Ram 1500 or 2500 heavy duties, but setting the large pickup truck and, ultra large SUV markets aside, and even the SUV market's questionable, right? But setting those aside, there's still plenty to be harvested here if you're an aspiring Chinese brand. So yeah, I mean, I think I think it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I mean, I guess if I had to bet, I would bet that the Congress will pass and Trump will sign some version of a law that says Chinese connectivity vehicles with Chinese connectivity can't be sold in the United States or maybe can't even visit from Canada, which would be complex to enforce. But then I would see the Chinese companies saying, fine, we have software that we developed with, the US based or the Canadian based operations of Magna or NVIDIA
Q and
or,
BlackBerry is a major
the
operating system provider.
right. We have chips from Intel made in Colorado or Ohio or wherever the heck, in other words, it seems like the Chinese, the biggest and best of the Chinese companies would suck that up and do it, as you say. And it doesn't seem like it's impossible. And the supply base, the suppliers, I mean, if I ran a big North American based supplier operation, tech supplier operation, again, I'm just pick on Magna for fun. There's others, Aptiv. I would be just waving a flag saying, you want US technology compliance? We're here to help. And
And this is where having really, really great auditors and having a formal auditing process would be very important. The one thing that I wanted to circle back on really quickly, Joe, is the fact that you had mentioned Trump could sign a law. I think the Congress is in agreement about Chinese vehicles, but Trump, he might sign that into law, and then he still might take a case by case basis
Well,
because
yeah. Well, right. I mean, again, as we've already seen, yeah, I think that's right. Which company is doing the asking, which state is doing the asking, which state has jobs that's in the balance. Yeah, this is going to be very political, and I think you're right. I think it will become negotiating leverage as opposed to some sort of set of principles.
I could totally see Lutnick and his team trying to figure out playing BYD against Geely or against Cherry to figure out who's going to give up the most and using
Hmm.
that almost like how the UAW does, picks GM, picks Ford as
Yeah, pick
the
a target.
first negotiating partner, but we do know that there's a high likelihood that Trump is going to be out of office in the next couple of years. And we
Well, that's
also
what the
know that the
Constitution
Chinese are
says.
going to be, we also know that the Chinese are going to be fairly consistent over the next several years. But I do think that, from what I've heard, they feel that this 2.5 year window that he's still in office is likely going to be the best opportunity, especially as the Iran war is on, is off, is on, is
Yeah, I
off.
think it's on
It's
today. Yeah. Well, yeah, yeah.
um and the other pressure point that should increase and create anxiety for the Chinese automakers is that BYD, Chery, Great Wall, there's these Chinese companies that have capacity CATL that is going to come online outside of China.
Hmm.
And so building capacity outside of China doesn't help their overcapacity inside China.
No.
But the echoes of dumping, the echoes of exporting too much, they're going to get louder and louder and louder.
Yeah, no,
Um,
absolutely. I mean, I think I think this is not a 1 or 2 month process. This is several years, to play out. I agree with that. I think it will take a number of years to play out. One last thing before we wrap up. I mentioned at the top. I guess we should probably circle back. you know, Here's some good news from the world of electric vehicles. Rivian raised its delivery forecast. I think I haven't looked at their stock price today, but apparently it sent their stock up pretty smartly. They raised their delivery forecast and I looked at this, 3,000 vehicles
3,000 units.
to 70,000 vehicles at the top end. So yeah,
Uh,
I guess the new success or the new success in the electric vehicle market is. Oh, and I think Tesla also outperformed on its Q2 deliveries. They outperformed Wall Street expectations. I mean, how do you look at that? I mean, does it matter, or is there sort of a meaningful bounce? I mean, does Rivian look like it's figured things out and is gonna you know, motor into the long term. What's your take on that?
so let me give you some perspective. Tell me their automotive division is 6 years old. Now they're a 18-year-old company or 17-year-old company, but their automotive division is 5 years old. So it's younger than Rivian. They launched the SU7 and the U7. In the first year in 2024, when they started deliveries, they delivered 150,000 units. 150. Wall Street is happy that Rivian is going to increase sales volume potentially by
Yeah,
3,000 units to 70,000.
yeah.
Okay. So we're not even playing the same sport.
No, no, and that is the thing, right? You have to, yeah, right. I mean, you have to kind of, what are you norming it against? Are you norming it against, Rivian's record of cutting production forecasts over the last couple of years because they couldn't get their supply chain together or their production systems together, or are you norming it against Xiaomi, right? As you
Well,
just did.
but they're global competitors. And
Oh yeah,
if Xiaomi is not going to be in the United States, Rivian, I know, wants to enter Europe
they'll be
by the end
competitors.
of next year,
Yeah,
by the end of next year
they'll encounter
with
each
the
other in
R2.
Europe. Yeah.
Exactly. So, and I'd love your thoughts on this. Have we figured out? So they don't have the excuse of we only sell $75,000, $90,000 cars where the market is very limited in the United States. They've just launched let's say a $55,000 car, which is cheaper, not mass market, but cheaper.
Right.
So they don't have the constraint of sales. Let's say. I think they said that they had over 100,000 reservations
Right.
refundable reservations, but reservations nonetheless. But they're only shipping 70,000 this year. What are your moles saying about, is it a manufacturing issue? Is it a supply chain issue? I don't understand how they can't get over the manufacturing hell hump, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and I don't have special knowledge of this. But I see the same numbers that you see. I mean, they have a pretty big factory out in Normal, Illinois that can build more vehicles than 70,000. And I do think that they're taking the ramp of the R2, the more affordable or lower priced, 50 some thousand, 50 $60,000 version. I think they're taking that ramp very slowly.
Very
These numbers
conservatively.
suggest very conservatively. There's probably that's probably for really good reason. I mean, they need to work on making sure that these vehicles have decent quality and don't get recalled for for stupid stuff, or recalled at all, regardless of whether it's stupid or justifiable. I also think that when they conceived this product, they were hoping to get a $7,500 federal tax subsidy. And anyone who tells you that the withdrawal and the cancellation of that subsidy doesn't matter is not telling you the truth. I mean, it absolutely matters, even to someone who's buying a 50 some thousand, for $60,000 vehicle. That matters. I mean, it's more than 10% of the price. So that's a problem. And I think it helps that gasoline is suddenly expensive and the price is volatile. I mean, I was looking at some numbers out of the UK. I mean, UK electric vehicle sales are zooming because of the high gas prices and the instability in the petroleum markets. So, and that's certainly helping here in the United States. But yeah, I mean, look, you know, I mean, Rivian has a big engineering shop in the town where I live, Plymouth, Michigan, and I like the Rivian concept, and I have no animus against Rivian. Their CEO doesn't make you grind your teeth with the stuff he says about issues that aren't related to cars.
It's a very polished image. RJ has a very
Ex
polished
Yeah.
image.
So all I'm saying is I'm when I express some concern and skepticism about Rivian, it's not because I have some animus against the idea of EVs or against this particular company. It's actually the reverse. But I think you have to look at gravity, and the gravity tells you that if they don't get cracking and start and fill that plant in Normal and start producing at capacity and justify the expense, the billions of dollars that they're going to spend building a second factory down in Georgia, you know, that's a they've got to do that. They've got to fill that factory and start selling it out, and they've got to come up, they got to show that the sales momentum is sufficient to to uh, to justify the additional capacity they have planned. That's just the way it is.
Well,
And so, this is a good step, but I think the point of our discussion here is that it's a step, and it's not gonna be enough. They have to go way beyond this to be successful.
Joe, before we close out, because there's a couple comments, but I did want to get you on record about Slate.
Yeah.
$25,000 starting price. They're going to start delivering end of this year. So, thoughts on how the prices kind of in, and your thoughts on their chances
So
of success.
I get a lot of I mean, I signed up to get email updates from Slate, and boy, am I getting a lot of them. And they're very, whoever's doing their marketing and promotion is doing a hell of a job. All the stuff about how you can customize the vehicle with wraps and customize with equipment and features. I think it's, I mean, Slate is the most interesting car company in the world right now, certainly in North America. I don't know how much visible they are elsewhere, in the sense that their business model and their kind of concept for how to, you basically build your own vehicle, sort of the IKEA approach to a vehicle. You can do a lot of the construction yourself and customizing yourself. It's really interesting. The con case on Slate is everyone talks about wanting a cheap vehicle. Nobody actually buys them in real life, or not very many people buy them in real life. I mean, Cox Auto has all kinds of data on this. They showed us right before the 4th of July break, where if you look at trucks, there's the base price, and then there's the $7,000 delta to the average price that people actually are willing to pay because they want the heated seats and they want this and they want that. So I do wonder whether, Slate, I think the pro case on Slate is kind of obvious, which is, okay, fine, it's $25,000 base price vehicle. Uh, Even if you spend 4 or 5 grand on accessories and cool wraps and all that kind of good stuff, you're still well below the average price of a vehicle, well below the price of kind of an average truck. So I I guess honestly, I mean, this is a cop out, I guess, but the jury is out, and it could well be that the Slate vehicle ultimately succeeds at a price point and a feature content point that's well above the $25,000 level that they're promoting.
It will be.
Yeah, it will be. Is it, people compare it to sort of the Toyota and Nissan trucks that in the 1970s, which were, stripped down, simple, cheap. I think there's a lot of romanticization of those trucks, but not a lot of people would buy a truck like that in real life. So, let's see what happens. I do think the business model is one that may survive the company, if you know what I mean. I mean, the concept of
Mm.
like a truck that you can heavily customize and buy features kind of a la carte. The more I look at that, the more attractive it seems, especially for people who are kind of, I think the truck buyer is kind of more up for that than the buyer of a, mid-sized sedan. So yeah, we'll see what happens. But I don't think it's
What
a
I'm
slam
taking from
dunk.
that what I'm taking from that, Joe, is that maybe you think it's a little too analog. The other thing that you had mentioned Rivian relying on that $7,500. I think Slate was also relying on that,
Oh, absolutely.
and I wanna point to they are at least the 3rd company, American company, that is relying on the Chinese. Whether the cells are rolled in the United States or China, Tesla is using Chinese cells. GM is or Ford is using Chinese IP to build cells in the United States. Slate is also using a Chinese battery supplier because they moved from NCM to
To LFP.
LFP, and that had to happen. I don't know who in the sourcing team or engineering team made that original decision to go NCM because that was probably an increase of 20% on their bill of materials, at least 20%.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
they had to get LFP to get to $25,000 target. Now, the CEO, an interesting thing, the CEO said 80,000 units gets us to break even. Recently, I've spoken with a few people who have talked about how it would be a perfect fleet or commercial vehicle
Yeah.
for a lot of organizations and entities. So that could drive the volume where the $25,000 price point is for B2B, and then, a portion of the
Well, and
80,000
that's
or whatever.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that's kind of a variation on the Rivian business model, right? I just went on and on about Rivian and forgot to mention the very important part of their business model, which is selling vans, commercial vans to Amazon, and which who are a shareholder, and Amazon has a or Jeff Bezos, I guess, he's not Amazon exactly, but pretty close. Uh, Jeff Bezos has a stake in Slate, and I agree with you that a vehicle with roughly 200 miles range and kind of stripped down, I think there could be a lot of commercial and fleet interest in such a vehicle for all kinds of different things. And which, if 80,000 is really the break even, maybe that's enough. But again,
But
like I said, I mean, we'll see.
one thing we know historically about fleet vehicles is that they're not very attractive to private consumers. And so if Slate becomes a fleet vehicle known for selling volume into fleets, it makes it a little more dicey to sell to private passenger vehicles or to private consumers. So
Yeah, they'll have to manage that extraordinarily carefully,
let
right?
me
So,
get to questions or comments. Tom H. BW China looks like a tale of two cities, ICE and NEV. VW's volumes were ICE. ICE in China is history. VW finally looks like they have their act together in NEV. I don't know about that, Tom. If you look at the joint venture partner Xpeng vehicles in the China market right now, I saw them. I didn't drive them yet, but I saw them at the Beijing Auto Show. They look great, but they're using last version platform from Xpeng, not the current version, not the newest version, and their sales are not doing that well. Tom
mm,
H also writes, beyond the cars, the U.S. embargo on China EVs is artificially sheltering North American supply chains from the agility of China's speed. Once the dam breaks, North American auto will be generations behind world-class performance. Compare Slate's vehicle and pricing to what's available in China at that price point and the US embargo may make sense. So those were his comments. But man, what we thought was going to be a 45-minute show is now getting to an hour and 5 minutes. So we have
So
a
we
lot to
should
say, a lot to
let
catch up
people
on.
go. Let these people go.
And we'll promise to try to be more consistent. So awesome to see you, Joe. I know you
Good to
have a
see you.
lot of things going on in your personal life. So hopefully that gets all sorted
Nothing
out.
bad.
And it sounds like you might have a lot of babysitting in your near
Yeah,
future, you and your wife. So
that could be, and testing out the child seat anchors and so yeah. Anyway, thanks everyone. We'll see you soon.
we'll
Have a
see you
good one.
guys.